You are listening to Radio Aula Mundi.
Hi there, wherever you are. I'm Marco Rixecker, a freelance writer, reporter, producer, teacher, translator, tour guide, poet, singer and songwriter. I speak several languages, and I'm the creator and founder of Radio Aula Mundi, an evolving podcast station where no language and all languages are spoken. It's a multilingual mix of music, poetry, lectures, languages, interviews, documentaries, recipes, and a lot more, co-produced with the students of the Aula Mundi International Cultural Center. You can find us on Linktree Radio Aula Mundi, podcasts.apple.com, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Deezer, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky. Search for Radio Aula Mundi. The following narrative includes excerpts from 2 collections of testimonies and interviews. Let's Talk About It Anywhere in the World and the Universal Phrasebook of Indigenous Languages, UPIL, where it is all about the voices, accents, and speech patterns of indigenous people anywhere in the world, hand in hand with my own personal anecdotes and observations. In addition to that, everybody is free to introduce themselves and speak their minds openly in their respective, often endangered, languages and dialects, without any paraphrases or expectations. So, let the story go on from there. Climate change is a top priority in my research of news, articles, podcasts, and other sorts of documents. And I know that it's also an important issue for most indigenous communities in the world, especially those affected by global warming. Natural disasters of all kinds are a direct consequence of human-caused climate change and include wildfires in areas where they have not been seen before. Such events can make headline news. So a couple of weeks after yet another calamity of this kind, I stumbled upon an article about the use of fire as a form of protection and as a cultural and spiritual practice among indigenous people. In this case, it's about the Yurok tribe of Northern California, which I've had the opportunity to visit. More precisely, it was the coastal part of their territory and reservation, as part of my journeys along the Pan American Highway network from the top of North America to the tip of South America. The use of fire to protect the forest is an ancestral cultural practice for the Yurok people. And key to the efforts to revive it is a woman by the name of Margo Robbins. She calls herself a cultural practitioner, and she is a basket weaver in the first place. Those are the 2 things she's going to mention to me early on when we connect online from different places in the world. Margo is sitting in her home in a small community on the Yurok Reservation, quite a bit upriver from the coastal area that I have visited years earlier, near the mouth of the Klamath River. Back then, I'd stick to places and spaces near the branch of the Pan American Highway, the Pacific Coast Highway, Highway 101, that I was following. I would also take a boat trip on the Klamath River, not too far upstream. And even though I would have the most interesting encounters and fascinating experiences, I did not get the opportunity to hear someone speak the Yurok language. And that's what Margo Robbins will do from the start. She's going to introduce herself a little bit in the language. And throughout our conversation, She's going to use some Yurok keywords that reflect her cause and activity, especially the word mech for fire. Other words and names reflect spiritual practices, such as controlled burns supposed to protect the forest, flora and fauna. In my conversation with Margo Robbins, I will also learn about the importance of fire to obtain the kind of wood that is used in traditional basket weaving and to make baskets waterproof. They can even be used as pots to make one of the most typical Yurok dishes, which is acorn soup. As a matter of fact, that's another topic Margo Robbins and I are going to explore for a little bit: ancient and ancestral cooking practices and foodways, which include the indigenous origin of what is now known as barbecue and consists of roasting meat, fish, and other food items over and around an open campfire. Scholars have attributed the invention of barbecue to the Caribbean, but it has been around for hundreds of years in Northern California too. I've seen it being practiced right next to Highway 101 when I had the opportunity to taste and sample some roasted salmon on redwood skewers. Traditional foodways still continue to exist on the Yurok Reservation of Northern California. Margo Robbins is going to demonstrate it at some point when she gets up and shows me a hand-woven basket that she uses to make soup with, including acorn soup. And so, it all boils down to the relationship and connection with the land, which the Kentucky-based author Wendell Berry calls household, in an essay written years before my conversation with Margo Robbins. I'm going to read an excerpt to her just to see how she reacts to it. And it will inspire Margo Robbins to end our conversation with a story about spiritual beings and how they took shape to populate the world. And the story will go on from there.
Ayakui Neknau Margo Robbins, Keechnak, co-founder and executive director of the Cultural Fire Management Council. I come from the traditional village of Morek, which is along the Klamath River in very far Northern California. As the Cultural Fire Management Council, we are a native-led, community-based nonprofit. We started bringing fire back to our homelands in 2012 and have not stopped and have no intention of stopping.
Again, I haven't really expected it, but Margo Robbins partly introduces herself in the Yurok language. And it makes me curious about the status of the language and how much of it Margo Robbins actually speaks. Please tell me more about the language that you have introduced yourself in at the very beginning.
So I introduced myself using the Yurok language. It was used up and down the river. Our neighboring tribes traded with each other and they knew each other's language. It is a language being revitalized. So it is taught in the schools. It is accepted as a world language in the colleges, and more people are starting to reclaim it, to learn it. It is not a first language for nearly all of us. There are only a couple of first language speakers left.
How fluent a speaker are you?
Minimally. I can struggle to carry on a conversation, and it's because I don't use it as often as I should. So were I to use the language on a regular basis, it would come much easier. When I was part of the language program, we met on a weekly basis, and we would have summer camps with the language. And that one summer we had immersion where we didn't speak anything except Yurok. And so that was pretty exciting. I'm certainly not as well versed as my sisters in it, but I somehow managed to get along.
Fire is the main topic of my conversation with Margo Robbins. Its traditional uses actually include the prevention of wildfires and the protection of the land, an ancient practice that existed in the Americas long before the arrival of the first Europeans. And that's exactly what Margo Robbins and her organization are trying to revive. How positive and how negative is fire?
In terms of our cultural traditions, there is no negativity attached to fire. It's all good. It's all necessary. When we have ceremony, there's always a fire as part of the ceremony. When we gather together, there's always a fire. And of course, we use fire to take care of the environment around us, the plants, the animals, the land itself, the water, all of those things benefit from fire. And it was given to us as a gift from the spirit beings that inhabited this place before we as humans were here.
How can fire contribute to the fight against climate change?
Fire is like huge in terms of mitigating climate change. So one of the things that using fire does is that it reduces the amount of vegetation on the land. So in the absence of fire, which has occurred for the last 100+ years, the vegetation has grown unchecked. It's just like so thick and dense, and the live vegetation. And then there's the dead vegetation that is laying on the forest floor, a recipe for out of control wildfires. Once they start, all of that acts as fuel, feed the fire. It gets bigger, 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 more intense because of all of that fuel buildup. So when you use fire to restore the land, it is reducing the amount of vegetation there, making more room for the native plants, and then the vegetation becomes more spaced out, and there's not all that underbrush and dead debris on the forest floor. So it actually acts as a wildfire prevention measure. So what's happening when these huge wildfires are going on is that it is, just wiping out millions of acres of trees that would otherwise be sequestering carbon. And so not only is it depleting the forest's ability to sequester carbon, but it's also putting all that smoke up into the air. And it's not just smoke from the trees either. It's burning down towns and all these really toxic things that create toxic smoke, I should say, not toxic things, all these things that create toxic smoke into the atmosphere. And so it's huge, it is eating up the protective ozone. It's depleting the forest that would otherwise store carbon. And so when we have the purposeful use of fire, it mitigates that. It reduces the spread and intensity of the wildfires. It also leaves ash and on the landscape, and so that is good for the soil. So there's just lots of benefits. One of the big things that is being, I feel like, really impacted by the climate change is our water. And climate change is just one factor, that is playing into it. There's also a lot of other factors, like using millions of gallons of water for fracking and all these diversions and all these other things. But when we are reducing the amount of vegetation on the land, it increases the water table. And so that's huge, like people are talking about bringing in non-native trees because they say that, oh, these trees aren't going to survive climate change. And I'm like, give us some time to get our land back into a healthy state, to reduce the amount of brush that's on the hillside so that the trees that are here have more access to more water. So it's a huge thing. It plays into everything, fire.
How did you learn all this?
How did I learn all of this? It's so interesting. When we first started burning, mostly I was just interested in it because I'm a basket weaver, and the hazel that we use for the baskets, it needs to have fire in order to be useful for basket weaving. And then, of course, there's always the wildfire factor too. But as we started down this path of reclaiming fire, it's just like you learn more and more things that fire affects, until pretty soon you realize it affects everything. It affects the soil, the water, the animals, the vegetation, the air, everything fire affects. And how did I learn this? I guess from listening to other people, sitting in a room with other cultural practitioners. You learn a lot from that. Reading different things, you learn from there, listening to other people talk about it, that are knowledgeable. You can learn from just about any place, even from, little bitty babies.
How important is storytelling as part of this whole process?
It's interesting because if you're talking about stories like creation stories and things like that, you don't hear them very often. And you don't necessarily always pick up on the deeper meanings of it when you do hear them. It's like then you learn stuff from other sources and you tie it back in, and it's like, oh, interesting. And so in my pursuit of understanding things in a deeper way, I'll go back and read the creation stories that Kroeber wrote down verbatim from, he called them as Indian informants, you know, and I don't read the part where he tries to interpret it because has a very different background from us and understand things very differently. But when you're reading the direct translation from the storyteller, you can learn a lot. And so I think that storytelling is important. And if you also include people telling their stories, that is hugely important because it touches that something inside you. I guess maybe it's that emotional part of you, maybe your heart, but it's like a joining of the mind and a heart for a deeper understanding when somebody is telling their story of whatever it is that their story is that they're sharing. So I think telling the story makes a big difference.
Generally, I try to keep my conversations with people casual, without the formal settings of a radio studio or live show. And that makes Margo Robbins feel comfortable enough to ask me at some point if we can interrupt the interview for a second because she has something cooking on the stove. Maybe it's something worth talking about, or nothing much to write home about. But it does get us a little bit into a conversation about the spiritual and practical uses of fire.
What's cooking?
Lurguri, coffee.
How important is fire for everyday routine things like cooking?
So traditionally, fire was, you can't cook without fire. And so it was an everyday thing. And gathering firewood was an everyday thing. And so in addition to the purposeful burning of the landscape to keep it healthy, all that gathering of cooking wood also kept the forest floor clean. And so although we did not use fire specifically traditionally to prevent wildfire, it was a byproduct of the cultural practice of using fire. Not only lighting fire on the ground, but also the gathering of dead wood to bring home to cook with. And as I mentioned earlier, that anytime there's ceremony that you're lifting up prayer, there's always a fire. We lift our prayers up with smoke, and they're answered by fire. That's what a friend of mine from upriver Kuduk territory, he said that. I'm like, oh my gosh, there are so many layered meanings into that. So that is true on many levels. In today's world, here on the river, we all have a wood stove that we use to heat our homes. And sometimes, you'll put a pot of soup or something on there to cook throughout the day. But most of us have a gas stove to cook with. But there's something about that wood heat that is so nice. And then living along the river, we spend a good bit of time, on the banks of the river. And of course, you always have a fire down there in the evenings. That's always good. And then we are reclaiming our right to use fire in other ways, the way that it was given to us to use to keep the land and all of creation healthy. And so some families have started to burn around their homes and also their gathering areas, just smaller burns, but that is taking place. And we are moving towards a time as we reduce the amount of vegetation on the land where it will be safer for families to burn bigger and bigger areas without fear of escape.
On my visit to the Yurok Nation, as part of my journey down the Pan American Highway from the top of North America to the tip of South America, I would sit down and chat with a man who was roasting salmon at the side of Highway 101, the Pacific Coast Highway, and the branch of the Pan American Highway network that I was following. And he would put cubes of salmon on redwood skewers and place them like a ring around an open fire. And fascinatingly enough, years later, down in Peru, on a long detour from the Pan American Highway, in the territory of the Yanesha Nation in the Amazon, I would be told about exactly the same practice of roasting meat on wooden skewers. So I mention all this to Margo Robbins and end up asking her how she feels about it.
What traditional ways of using fire to make barbecue do you guys have over there?
So what you described is one of the ways. In fact, my son-in-law gave me some of those redwood sticks to cook fish around the fire for Christmas. We also have smokehouses. I'm sitting here, and off right out to my right, I can see my smokehouse there. And so when you get, a lot of fish, you can hang it in the smokehouse, or deer too. And then it's a real low heat, mostly smoke with just a little bit of heat. And so we put salmon, sturgeon, eels, deer, all of that into the smokehouse. Traditionally, we cooked with hot rocks in a basket. And we still do that during ceremony time. When there's ceremony, we have different cook camps, and the fire from those cook camps comes from the main medicine fire. And then we cook all the food over that fire. And for the acorn soup, I have a cooking basket. I'll grab it and show you. So this is a cooking basket. It's woven with hazel sticks and spruce roots, and this basket will hold water. So during ceremony time, we'll put the bleached acorns in there with water. You put your rocks into the fire. They get red hot without breaking, and then you take them out and put them in your basket with the acorns, and just stir it so that it doesn't burn your basket. So that was another way that we used to cook.
One of my recurrent questions about the trickster in indigenous cultures gets Margo Robbins to tell me a creation story about fire.
Who's your trickster?
Well, we have coyote, and in some people's stories, it is Coyote that went and got fire and brought it back to the people. In our story, it is one of the most powerful, that pre-human race of spirit beings, our word for them is Wage. And so it was one of them. His name was, gosh, now it has just escaped me. I can remember his partner's name. I'll think of it in a little bit. Wapeka. And he's the one who went with a bunch of animals and got the fire from the sky. And when he stole it, he passed it from one animal, and then they passed it on to the next, onto the next, onto the next, until finally Frog was the last one to get it. And the old ladies that owned the fire, they were chasing all these Wapeka and all these animals the whole time, just almost ready to pounce on them and grab it back. And then finally they gave it to Frog, and he took it in his mouth and went under the water with it. And he just stayed under there till finally those old ladies left, and then he came out and spit it into the roots of the willow. And so traditionally we use the willow sticks to make fire. Apparently it's one of the harder wood species to bring fire out of, but that's what we used.
Something else I'm curious about is that when you burn a forest, you might actually hurt animals.
How much stewardship is there for wildlife?
So we don't burn during the birthing season because we don't, we're trying to make better homes for the animals, not kill them in their homes. So we're trying to improve their habitat. As when they get big enough to run or fly, then we'll start burning again.
I'm also interested in some of the more practical uses of fire and how they connect with Margo Robbins' knowledge and skills of traditional basket weaving.
How do you say fire in the Yurok language?
Metch.
Metch.
I actually have a relative named Morik Metch. And Morik is the village I come from, and Metch is, like we said, fire.
How do you make fire?
So you have a straight stick, willow is what we used, and a flat board with a little hollowed out place in it, sort of roundish, that the stick sits into. And then you have that stick between your hands like this, and you rub it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until you get a little coal. And then you roll that coal into a little bundle of dry stuff. And then that's the fire.
So what about air?
Well, it just naturally gets air because you're outside. Or even if you're inside. It was funny, a friend of mine gave me a fire kit, and I had it just sitting on my ping pong table, and my son came in one day. All my kids are adults now, and he picked it up and he went like this, and he made a coal, and he rolled it off onto a piece of paper, and it was fire. First time he'd ever done it.
What's your favorite tool like?
My favorite tool? A fork. I guess one of my favorite tools is my little deer horn awl that I use when I'm weaving baskets to to either make the rows really close together and tight together, or for closed weave baskets, or to keep them equidistant if it's an open weave basket.
The time has come to wrap it up. But before we part ways, I want to make sure to give Margo Robbins an opportunity to experience reciprocity in terms of really sharing questions and answers back and forth.
What can I do for you guys?
Well, I think it is really helpful just getting the word out about good fire. You know, that fire is a necessary part of the ecosystem. And it's our responsibility as humans to take our place in that ecosystem the way we are meant to, and to utilize the gift of fire to take care of the landscapes. Because if we don't, it will become incapable of taking care of us. You know, our existence here on Earth it's a two-way street. We need to develop a reciprocal relationship with the land around us that we rely on. I think that people who, you know, who live in cities, they probably don't even think about where their water comes from. You know, where's your water come from? Out of the faucet. Well, it actually comes from the mountains, you know, the forests. And we need to take care of those mountains and forests. And we need to take care of them with the most efficient, effective tool we have. And that tool is fire. I guess my favorite tool is fire.
Again, at the time of my conversation with Margo Robbins, I'm reading a book which is a compilation of essays written by the Kentucky poet, author, environmentalist, and farmer Wendell Berry. In his work, he frequently writes about the sustainable use of the land and other ecological causes. So, I read a little text out of that book, which is entitled, "The Ground I'm Standing For is the Ground I'm Standing On," out loud to Margo Robbins.
The environmental crisis has happened because the human household or economy is in conflict at almost every point with the household of nature. We have built our household on the assumption that the natural household is simple and can be simply used. We have assumed increasingly over the last 500 years that nature is merely a supply of raw materials, and that we may safely process those materials merely by taking them. So Margo, tell me, how do you like them apples?
Sounds like they hit the nail right on the head. People do seem to be at war with nature, that they're, you know, for the most part, many people have no feeling of reciprocity for what they're taking from nature. Our creation stories tell us that all things have a spirit, that what we see around us today, they're descendants of that pre-human race of spirit beings. And they took physical form so that we might have a really good place here to coexist with them. They provide everything we need. But it's our responsibility to take care of them and to recognize and show appreciation, you know, that it's not just raw materials. It's like, oh my God, you know, I cringe even to to call, all this vegetation on the land fuels. In the fire world, they call it fuels. It seems so impersonal and disrespectful to just consider it fuels. I mean, that's what it turns into, I guess, when you don't take care of it and that feeds the wildfire. But that's not what it's meant to be.
To say goodbye, I ask Margo Robbins a very simple question about the Yurok language and culture. And the story goes on from there.
So how would you say thank you and see you next time in the Yurok language?
Ka kikemnewechik is I will see you again.
Postscript. As part of my conversations with people, I often have them ask questions, either specifically for someone I know I'm going to chat with in the near future, or broadly for anyone I might speak with anytime, anywhere in the world. For example, the very day of my online conversation with Margo Robbins, I have another interview session with a British electro-pop band by the name of Pressure Drop. It is a duo based in Bristol. I tell them about my upcoming conversation with Margo Robbins, who she is and what she does, as well as the culture she belongs to. It triggers their curiosity, and each of them comes up with a specific question for her.
I guess for them to establish that and use that knowledge, they would need to have some power or control over the decisions that are made in the environment, and maybe on a local political level. I mean, maybe I would, if she was here, I would ask her how does she see that she can facilitate this as a as a project to establish this way of working with wildfires.
When we are doing large burns, we're required to get a permit from CAL FIRE. They typically will, somebody, at least one or two people will come and for training at our prescribed fire events to increase their skills and knowledge and qualifications for prescribed burns. The United U.S. Forest Service, we haven't worked with them much. They're the part of our ancestral territory that they have authority over is a good ways from where we're located. So we haven't really worked with them much. They sometimes send people to our trainings though also. So I guess, we all have a role to play in restoring fire to the land. And I'm just hoping that those government agencies significantly step up their number of acres that they burn annually, because they're not that far behind us and they have like 100 times more resources.
Does she feel that she's being taken seriously, going back to her practice that has evolved over thousands of years?
Absolutely. So when we first started burning, which was a little over 10 years ago, CAL FIRE was, I think, pretty skeptical about giving us a permit to burn. And as soon as we started burning, they would send their airplane overhead to see what we was doing. And we're like looking up thinking, oh man, if only they would give us 1/10 of the money it cost them to fly that airplane overhead. And then they would send people to stand by and watch us. and you could tell those people wanted to help burn so bad, and we're like, here, you want the torch, and they would say no, that they couldn't. But after a few years, CAL FIRE came to understand by every time watching us that we knew what we were doing, that we had skills and knowledge to put fire on the land and keep it where we wanted it. And they also realized that we were willing to follow the rules. So if our burn plan called for, a certain amount of fire engines to be there, that one time we didn't have enough engines, and so we didn't burn that day. And then that evening we hustled up to the neighboring tribe, said, look, we really need you guys to come down with the fire engine so we can, meet the requirements of our burn plan. And they came down. And I think it was after that CAL FIRE kind of really started changing their attitude towards us. Also, we had meetings with the head of CAL FIRE. It was set up by our neighboring tribe, the Karuk, and the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, and they invited me. And so we're in there with, the heads of CAL FIRE, explaining to them the need to put more fire on the ground and why it was necessary. And so in time, we built that relationship with them, and we began to learn each other's story and to appreciate and respect that. It used to be that if we couldn't get a permit, we'd be just angry, and still we get upset. But after we got to know them, we realized that if something was to go amiss, whoever gave that permit would lose their job. And they have families, they have house payments and car payments, And so when you get to see them as people, as real people with, it makes a difference, and to the point now where it's like, hey, there's CAL FIRE, and so we work together really good. They actually gave us a partnership, a recognition award, so that was pretty cool. And the legislators also are reaching out to Native people to help solve this wildfire crisis that we are faced with. That as Native people, we kept this land healthy and in balance for tens of thousands of years. And in the past 200, it's like the world's burning up. And so, unfortunately, it has taken all these big wildfires for the people in the governmental high places to realize that, hey, maybe as Native people, we knew a little something and it's worth asking us. And they actually listen. Like when they was drafting legislation, they got a hold of us, and, we shared information with them, and they went back to the drafting table and changed what they were writing appropriately. And so that's a big thing. That's a big thing. One of the latest bills that was passed states that cultural fire practitioners are considered the same as a NWCG qualified burn boss. So that's big. And so I think that we definitely are being taken seriously, and that feels good.
The next question is much broader. It comes from another indigenous woman by the name of Amy Juan, who belongs to the Tohono O'odham Nation of southern Arizona. She is a cultural activist and works as the administrative manager of a co-op farm in the San Javier district of her reservation just outside of Tucson, Arizona. And her question is,
how am I helping my community?
I have helped bring fire back to the people. And with that fire comes the cultural resources that we rely on to maintain our identity as Yurok people. Traditional food, medicine, basket weaving materials, cordage. Our organization has provided employment for 18 local people in a job in a environment with really, really high unemployment. And you know, the people that work for CFMC, we all just love our jobs, and the community appreciates what we're doing. And that's important, you know, that's important. And then also, you know, when you work with fire, fire is more than just a tool. Fire is a spirit. And when you work with fire, you're doing spiritual work. And so we are all reconnecting to spirit.
Margo Robbins' answers to the questions coming from other people inspire me to really wrap it up with a couple of follow-up questions. And the story will go on from there.
What are you still up against?
Well, there are there's always obstacles, it seems like, to getting done what needs to get done. One of them is that there are certain times during the year when the places that are very shady that they will burn. And it is during the times when every place else is hot and dry, including here. And so we can't get a burn permit during that time, summertime. And so there are some places that continue to go unburned and continue to, you know, just grow unchecked. And they need to be taken care of with fire. And so that's a hurdle. Of course, money is always a challenge. You know, it costs way less to do prescribed fire than they use to do fight fire, but it does cost a good bit of money. We had a budget of around 800,000 last year for we have 13 full-time people and 5 part-time people. So luckily the government has put a good bit of money into prescribed fire, but a problem with that is you have to be really specific in the exact area you're gonna burn. And sometimes there's need outside of that identified area. And luckily for us, we have support from the philanthropic sector. And so they don't have those restrictions on it. So that's really helpful. One of the big hindrances is the requirement from government agencies to have the CEQA and NEPA documents, the environmental compliance documents. It takes a long time to complete them, and it's very expensive. For tribes like the Yurok tribe, who has never left our homelands, you know, we've always been here. They are, or we are a really developed tribe with, you know, fisheries, hydrology, wildlife, all those different departments. It doesn't make sense that we would have to get permission from somebody else to say, yes, you can burn. We see from after you've spent $60,000 in a year doing this study that it's not really going to harm anything. So that's sort of a sticking point. There are, one of the biggest things also is that for 5 generations of people, there has been a message that fire is bad, fire is dangerous. And so overcoming that and getting a more social license to burn is another challenge. And typically the media only covers these big, terrifying wildfires. It's very seldom that you see them covering a prescribed burn or a cultural burn. So there's definitely hurdles. Most recently, the the Air Quality Board has reduced the amount of particulate matter that is allowable, and we have yet to see how that's going to affect our ability to do prescribed and cultural burns, because you can't burn without some amount of smoke. It is much less, and then when we have wildfires and it's not toxic like wildfire smoke, and it prevents wildfires. So I'm hoping that there's going to be some allowance made for it.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years from now?
Oh, I see us doing like 5,000 acre burns plus. We are we have a drone pilot in training, because like right now we average about 30 acres a day burning, because our land is so steep and so thick with brush that that's about all we can get done in a day. And it's really it's challenging terrain. And so with the drone pilot, he will be trained to do aerial ignitions. And so we'll be able to just black the perimeter of the burn area, and then that drone will drop fire all in between. And so we are looking to really, really scale up the amount of acres that we're doing. We are looking to expand the rights of the average person to be able to burn on their land, to protect themselves from wildfire, and also to keep their land healthy or restore it to health. Fire shouldn't only be in the hands of the government agencies. At one time, everybody knew how to use fire and used it. And not just Native American people, the indigenous people of this land, the other continents and countries too, Ireland, England, Australia, New Zealand, all of those places used fire.